Welcome to Football Never Sleeps, the aspiring to be viral, time slot adaptable, caffeine loving, mic dropping, not slapping, live weekly YouTube show all about Notre Dame football and the baseball cliches it conjures when it comes to offseason hires. I'm Eric Hansen, fresh from covering the nation's #1 women's basketball team on Monday night. He's Tyler James, fresh from covering something that resembled a men's basketball game and a rant that definitely didn't resemble spontaneity. Together, we're the content creators, curators, and sometimes couch potatoes when it comes to everything to do with ND sports. On tonight's show, we'll break down the latest Notre Dame football hire and look ahead at what might still be ahead with regard to staff changes. NFL scouting combine talk, redshirt freshmen and transfers this spring, the latest college football playoff morphing. We've got all that for you too. But we'll never morph away from taking your questions, so start filling up the queue and buckle up. This is
All right. Welcome, everybody. We appreciate everyone joining us on another Tuesday. I did it again.
You want me to do the intro again?
No. I don't know why the default is to loop the song. Why would anyone want a looped song? Okay. Sorry, I got a lot going on. I'm trying to keep up with everything, and I totally whiffed there. Apologies for although it doesn't ever hurt to hear that.
The guy that sings that song was in the area about a week ago. We could just have him do it live.
Yeah.
Steve Lundgren.
Yeah, so we appreciate his song, and we apologize for ruining it sometimes by accidentally looping it. Down to serious business. Make sure that you're subscribed to us here on our YouTube channel, which is free, of course. That allows you to get in questions during the show. As Eric mentioned, we always want to answer your questions, and it lets our content populate into your feed whenever we post a video. We'd also like you to join us over at InsideNDSports.com, where you can get access to our premium analysis and recruiting coverage and special access to us on the Insider Lounge, where we share our inside information first. You can try us out over there with a 30-day free trial using promo code NDYT. There's a link to subscribe in the video description below. And we will start tonight's show with Notre Dame's hiring of Mike Martin as general manager. At the end of last week, Notre Dame made a seemingly impressive hire to replace Chad Bowden as general manager. Mike Martin was the director of scouting advancement for the NFL's Detroit Lions the past 4 seasons, which have been particularly transformative for that NFL organization. His addition hasn't been formally announced yet, but we've confirmed with sources that it will be eventually. What do you like about this hire, Eric?
Well, I like the variance and roles that he's had within the NFL that give him different perspective and different angles to the job as college football general manager. I also like seeing that he got a chance to see different organizations doing different things. It wasn't just he's just not been with the Detroit Lions all that time. Now, one, he's been with the Lions. I like the fact that he was contributing to the team's success through roster construction and building from when they were 3-13-1 to when they're now 15-2 this past season. Another thing I like, I have a long list, is overlap during the time with Houston Texans. There he worked with Matt Jansen, who's currently Notre Dame's director of scouting. So they have a history together. And then his roles at most of his junctures dealt with evaluating college talent. So those are the things that I like. I think if I had a misgiving, it's that he's never worked for a college team. Like he hasn't been on the college level as, let's say, assistant coach or director of scouting for a college team. But his responsibility certainly touched the college game. How about you, Tyler?
Yeah, I think as it relates to college, I think it's.
Do you have a list that long?
It's a decently long list.
Okay.
As it relates to his college experience, I think the fact that he played defensive back at Vanderbilt is helpful. He knows the demands of being a student athlete at a academically important school,
and he got good grades.
Yeah, and he was a good student at that. He wasn't just getting by. I like his experience in the NFL. Certainly, the experience lends itself to him being more of an evaluator than a recruiter, which I think is fine. It's something we've talked about as sort of making sense and needing to be different roles than what it had been under Chad Bowden, just because of the demands of the increasingly changing college football structure. And I like a lot, like, because I follow the NFL more closely than you do, the way the Lions have really come together and improved as a team. They're very offensive line and defensive line dependent. Like, I think they have a very similar blueprint to what Notre Dame aspires to. And so I see alignment there with what Marcus Freeman wants his football program to be. So I think that should be helpful with this addition of Mike Martin. So, and like I mentioned, like, the Lions have been a laughingstock for a long time, but they were NFC North champions the past 2 seasons, improving to 12-5 and then 15-2. And 4 seasons ago, they were 3-13-1. So that's how much they've improved in that amount of time. So I think there's a lot to like about what the Lions have done overall, and Mike Martin being a part of that, seeing that, having an impact and learning from that experience. I think that's all those things are going to be very helpful for him.
So I used to cover Major League Baseball way early in my career. I'm curious. We say home run higher now in baseball. Do they say it's a touchdown higher when they have a good?
I don't think so. I try to avoid cross sports analogies, but I sometimes they slip in, and home run higher is definitely one of the biggest cliches as it relates to college football, which has nothing to do with college football. Yeah, it should be a touchdown higher or a sack higher. Like, I guess getting sacked would be a bad thing. You'd be losing your job. But yeah, all signs seem that this is a good hire, and I think indicate sort of the direction Marcus Freeman wanted this job to be heading with the opening after Bowden left. Speaking of leaving, next thing I wanted to talk about is if the staff carousel is over. There haven't been any other major departures in the last week. Texas, who reportedly considered Mike Mickens as a top target, hired Mark Orphy from Rutgers to coach its safeties. Wisconsin, who was reportedly considering a Notre Dame assistant to the general manager Carter Allman, hired internally Marcus Sedberry as its general manager. And the Irish are still in the market for a director of player personnel. Eric, at this point, do you think the main coaching staff will remain in place moving forward?
I do, but until everything stops, there's always that chance that there's going to be. But we're running out of NFL positions to fill, which either directly affect Notre Dame or they affect someplace else that affects Notre Dame. I do think, as you alluded to, that there's going to be hirings around Mike Martin, and those are going to be important roles to fill. And I don't think the carousel has stopped in terms of college general managers being hired and teams maybe at lower levels of the FBS or even the FCS to a certain extent, tapping into personnel that's lower on the food chain at some of these bigger schools. They may have an interest in some people. So I don't know that that's settled, but those aren't really high profile hires. One thing we should mention is Jaywan Sider's position with Notre Dame became official today. We knew that would come up. They have to go through the vetting process. And so 9 days after the story broke, it became official today, and he will hold the position of associate head coach in addition to being running backs coach, which means more money and a louder voice in the meetings. I think he's going to be a real asset in their offensive meetings.
Yeah, and there was a question from Ron Robert. How does the Sider role as associate head coach relate to Mike Denbrock's responsibilities? I would add that Dylan McCullough was the associate head coach previously, so it, in theory, it wouldn't really change anything based off of how things were working previously. I don't think associate head coach means anything more as it relates to offensive play calling or anything like that Mike Denbrock would be overseeing.
Right, but he brings a different background than Dylan in the fact that he was co-offensive coordinator at Penn State and was involved a little bit more in their offense. I mean, I think they see him as an asset in the meeting room and not just, okay, Mike, that sounds great.
Yeah,
Although that's what I would say. I'd say, okay, Mike, that sounds great.
I just don't think they're taking responsibilities away from Mike Denbrock in any sort of way.
Correct. Yes.
That I want to make
And
sure.
Mike's been associate head coach at Notre Dame before too. It's a way to give you more money.
Yeah, and it helps for guys like Dylan McCullough wants to be a head coach, and to have something like that where they can find different ways to give them more responsibilities. A lot of times it's off the field stuff and not necessarily like game day related stuff. So maybe stuff during the week.
Mike Elston had that.
Even something like the blue gold game where Marcus Freeman has been using, it was Dylan McCullough versus Al Washington as the two head coaches of the blue and gold teams. Like that's just another opportunity to be in a leadership position. And I think Marcus is someone who likes to utilize that and give guys opportunities to do that to continue to grow in their careers. The one thing I wanted to add in terms of the staff carousel, at least to my knowledge, the New Orleans Saints in the NFL, they haven't really filled out their defensive coaching staff. They hired Kellen Moore, who was the offensive coordinator for Philadelphia Eagles. So that is why it's later down in the process, because he had to win the Super Bowl before taking that job with the Saints. I have no indication that will impact Notre Dame, but those hires could create some dominoes that maybe in turn impact Notre Dame down the line. But that's probably the biggest thing left out there that you just need to make sure that clears before you could feel really comfortable. Although it seems like everything is in place for Notre Dame to have this coaching staff moving forward.
Do you think the New Orleans Saints openings will create a domino effect when it comes to closing Dairy Queens in Texas?
I don't know. Maybe that's what it's all about. Maybe they're going to swoop in and hire some.
Big news in SouthBendTribune.com today.
Hire some Dairy Queen workers to help out the New Orleans Saints. One last thing I wanted to get into before we get to questions was a little bit of NFL Combine talk. That was some news that came out recently that 8 former Notre Dame players were invited to the Combine, which begins later this month. Those 8 players are wide receiver Bo Collins, defensive lineman Howard Cross III, tight end Mitchell Evans, linebacker Jack Kaiser, quarterback Riley Leonard, defensive lineman Riley Mills, cornerback Benjamin Morrison, and safety Xavier Watts. So Eric, which, if any, Notre Dame players would you say got snubbed from getting an invite to the Combine?
I would say Jordan Clark has a case there, and I would also say maybe to a certain extent Mitch Jeter does, since they have the specialist part of that, and I think he's one of the more talented guys. Now, he didn't have the numbers, but when he was healthy, he was pretty good. I would say those two. You look at the other guys, Rod Hurd, the wide receivers, R.J. Oben, who played in the Senior Bowl, and I'm not sure that they have the case, and yet all those guys will be able to perform at the Notre Dame's Pro Day, which should be in late March. The thing, Tyler, too, is it as big a deal this year being snubbed if you're from Ohio State or Notre Dame, given how deep into the season everybody went? And right. For example, Mitchell Evans isn't going to do any of the physical testing at the Combine. He's going to go and do the medicals and get measured and in his underwear and interview, hopefully with his clothes on, but he is not going to do the physical testing. He'll do that at Pro Day.
Yeah, it's probably the biggest thing would be just probably easier and more convenient to be at the Combine to talk to all the different people that are there to get that sort of leg up, even if you aren't going to be testing. Jordan Clark was the guy that was at the top of my list. R.J. Oben is one player that I've been looking at some of the big boards that some of the draft analysts have made, and he was the only one that I saw mentioned on a big board. Pro Football Focus had him in its top 300 maybe. And
there's like 275 or something get drafted. So,
right. So if you're going off of that, maybe he would be someone that could be considered snubbed, but I think maybe going off of his season, I don't know that you would feel that way. But I think there's a pretty good group of Notre Dame players that deserve to be there. Who from the the guys who were invited is the most likely to improve their draft stock, in your opinion?
And I'm going to group this together with Pro Day and Combine because I'm not sure yet who's doing what at each of those. So let's say once they finally get their testing done, I think Bo Collins will test well. I think he'll jump out of the gym. I think he'll run reasonably fast. I think he will show up in those kind of drills. Now, when they look at his film, they're like, well, you had some drops and you were not always, consistent with your play. But in terms of testing, that would be the guy that I would think would test well. And maybe to some extent, Mitchell Evans and Riley Leonard. I think Mitchell, just because he keeps getting further removed from the ACL surgery, and I think there's a better version of him than what we saw at all during the 2024 season. We saw glimpses of it. I think he was a better version of himself in 2023 before the injury. And then Riley Leonard, just because I think Riley Leonard makes you kind of like him. He'll do well in the interviews. I think he'll do reasonably well in what they ask him to do physically because he's a really good athlete. And they'll say, well, he's a good athlete, good locker room guy, good leader. Maybe we're pushing him down a little bit too far. I mean, I don't envision him getting into the talk for day one or day two, but he could certainly help himself. How about you? Who do you like?
Yeah, to me, it would be Kaiser. I just think that he'll continue to build on some of the momentum that he got at the Senior Bowl. It seemed to raise some eyebrows there. I think he'll test pretty well. I don't know that it's going to be off the charts by any means, but I think will be respectable and certainly is going to be someone that impresses in interview settings. It's hard to walk away from a Jack Kaiser interview and not be impressed with him, which, I mean, you could say that about a lot of the Notre Dame players. But I think the combination of those things put him at the top of the list, in my opinion. Collins is a good one because I do think he's more athletic than maybe his film shows at times. Other guys, I'm not really sure about. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what Benjamin Morrison can prove in terms of where he's at in his recovery. And I don't know that that will lead to him testing or anything, but the medicals that come through the process will allow him to maybe answer some questions that teams have about where he's at, what he's been through, and what that means for him moving forward. So those are the guys that came to mind for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think Watts is naturally going to rise a little bit just because people will keep looking at his film and they'll interview and they'll say, look at his instincts and look how he raises the level of the players around him. And I think that's more, I mean, you look at Kyle Hamilton and you go, wow, he's freaky. You don't look at Xavier Watts and say that's a freak athlete, but he is a freak college football player in his instincts. He moves a lot quicker because he can anticipate things so well. Jadon Blair, I mean, if you put Jadon Blair and Xavier Watts in physical testing, people are going, wow, look at this 6'5" kid playing safety.
Yeah. All right. So of the Notre Dame guys, who would you draft highest?
I think it'll be Morrison or Watts. And I think if Mills were healthy, somebody might think about that possibility just because of his physical attributes. With him not being healthy and having kind of a long recovery, I'm not sure that he's in that conversation. So it comes down to Watts and Morrison. I think the NFL will like Morrison better just because he fits more the prototype of the guy that they're looking for than Watts with his size and his speed. Again, he's not a freaky athlete. He's just a freaky football player. So Morrison is everything you want in a corner. And if he's healthy and they can project that, that's hard to turn that one down. But I think those two will be in the highest conversation. How about you?
Yeah, I think they're definitely the two highest. I would lean towards Morrison as long as there's not major red flags as it relates to the health when the teams are going through their processes there. I think it just seems more likely that he has what they're looking for. Like you said, like he was very productive, even though he didn't finish out his final season at Notre Dame. He was productive in the time he played, and gained a lot of respect for what he was able to do at Notre Dame. And I think that'll translate well to the NFL level. I would expect Xavier Watts to be a successful NFL player too. I just don't know that he will command being drafted higher. I think sometimes it's harder for teams to go on safeties than corners earlier. So I think that all those things play in Benjamin Morrison's favor. All right. Lastly, on the combine talk, do you think Notre Dame will have more or less invites next year?
Yeah, I went to our scholarship chart at Inside ND Sports to help me out because I was trying to do it by memory, and I'm like, wait a second, we have the scholarship chart. I can look at that. I think it's going to be about the same. I think there's some players that can, like Jalen Stroman, who's and maybe Jared Dawson as well. A couple of I think they could play themselves into it. I think Malachi Fields will definitely be a guy that's there. But I think it's about that number, maybe 7 or 8. And again, maybe there's some guys that'll play themselves into that place. I don't see offensive linemen jumping out early like Schrouth and Jaguza and guys like that. I don't see them doing the all Blake Fisher thing. I think they'll probably be 4th and 5th year guys, most of their offensive line, but we'll see. But there's some good prospects there. So how about you? What number did you come up with?
Yeah, I think it'll be more. I did put Wagner and Schrouth as guys that could be leaving.
Okay.
I mean, because they'll be graduates, I believe. I mean, they would have been at Notre Dame long enough to graduate. So I just don't know that they would stick around. I mean, maybe they will. I don't have any. I'm not saying that I have that. This isn't based on reporting. This is just speculative in terms of what I would guess. If they play as well as I think they can play next season, I think that will put themselves in a position to go into the NFL.
Right. I think that where I was hesitant to do that is I think with the direct payments that are coming with the NIL, they can say, another year of college.
Sure.
And that offensive line in 2026, if all those guys came back, whoo.
Yeah, I don't know. Offensive line, it's such a physical position that I appreciate that all those guys that have been doing that under Harry Hiestand and choosing to come back. It's just like, I don't know why you would beat yourself up in college for another year if you had such a good, if you have your degree and have a good draft prospect to stick around. But the money can make up the difference there in terms of convincing you to stick around. But yeah, I mean, you could see 2 running backs, right? I mean, Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price in theory could get combine invites.
And we're assuming everybody's staying on the roster. I mean, there's people that could transfer out that affect that.
Sure. Yeah, and there's a lot of guys that transfers in, like you mentioned, Malachi Fields, Jared Dawson, Jalen Stroman, Devontae Smith. Maybe he can break the Nickelbacks not getting invited to the combine stretch for Notre Dame.
Eli Raridon, I think, is a guy that might.
Yeah, Eli Raridon. He was a name I wrote down. What if Adon Schuler has another great season? Like, would it be crazy for him to go early? I don't know. I mean, I think he is more of a freakish athlete than Xavier Watts, and so maybe that would, and then he would have 2 years as a starter under his belt. So I think there's a number of guys that could consider that after next season. So I would go with more, but it's so hard to predict this far out, of course, what's going to happen with the rest of their season this coming year, and then what their position will be going into the year after that. All right, let's hop into some questions. We have a number of them. Since we were talking about a little bit of the offensive line, let's go to this one from Joe Peters first. How does Rudolph get the O-line to be ready from game 1 on? A slow gelling of the offensive line isn't acceptable to a successful college football playoff berth this year with Miami, Texas A&M, and Arkansas in the first month. Excuse me.
I think they're actually in pretty good shape there. I mean, they have a lot of experienced players. I think the biggest question is who's the left tackle and who's the right guard. Is Jagaza a guard or a left tackle? Is Anthony Knapp a guard or a left tackle? And is Ashton Craig going to be healthy? And if he's not, you have some options there too. But you have Emil Wagner coming back. You have Billy Schrouth. I mean, I don't think it's going to be the challenge it was last year where you have this intense kind of training camp competition. Now, there's always surprises and stuff, but you think about the depth of this offensive line with Sullivan Absher and Garby Lambert and some of those guys. I mean, there's no reason for Notre Dame not to be a pretty good offensive line from week one.
Yeah, and maybe some of the guys don't play the same position next year as they have previously, but they've played next to some of the guys that they'll be playing next to. So I think that helps and makes things a little bit easier. I think especially guys that have experience at multiple positions, that could make that transition easier. Certainly, it's an important thing that Notre Dame needs to make sure all these guys are working together as one. That's one of the biggest things when it comes to the offensive line play. But I think there's plenty of time to do that between now and then. Just because we don't know the answers to who will play where now doesn't mean that it's going to look like that in the middle of August. I would imagine there will be a pretty good idea by then of what this offensive line is going to be, and then they'll be able to come together pretty well. I mean, I think the offensive line gelled pretty well this past year with a lot of inexperienced players. So I would sort of put the trust and faith into Joe Rudolph to get it done again this year with more experienced and maybe more talented guys in the starting lineup to open the season. All right. Eric Swope asks, I am curious to know if Notre Dame already had GM Mike Martin in their sights to replace Chad Bowden. It's interesting that Notre Dame did not match the USC offer, but still paid big money. Thoughts?
I did not get the sense that he was in their crosshairs or whatever. That might have been somebody that was a name. My sense is that came up later because they looked at James Blanchard first. So I don't think that's how that played out.
Yeah, I would agree as well. It does raise the question to me is like of the fact that James Blanchard and Mike Martin were these two guys that one came close to getting the job and one got the job. Like, how similar are those two guys? Like, they don't seem terribly similar, right? So it's interesting to me that they were both considered for the same position. And how does that impact what Notre Dame's looking for still left in the player personnel opening that was left by Zaire Turner. So I think that part of it is intriguing to me, but I don't think this was something that Mike Martin was someone that Marcus Freeman's like, see you, Chad, we're going to get Mike Martin. So I think this just happened. And I think, Marcus Freeman knows the strengths and the weaknesses of Chad Bowden as probably as well as anyone, right? Like, because he's been with him side by side throughout their careers. So I think Notre Dame had a sense of what it wanted moving forward and what it felt like it could do and needed to bring in, and it was okay with Chad Bowden leaving the program.
Yeah, I think, and we'll have a chance to talk to Marcus about this, but I think Marcus looked at what do we need in the department as a whole, not just with the general manager. What jobs do we need to have filled? What's going to change about college football with these direct payments? What's changing in college football in terms of roster construction? And then how many of these does James Blanchard fill? How many does Mike Martin fill? And they don't fill the same ones. You still need to hire people, whether you create positions or whether you retrofit them into a job title that's already sitting there. I think you still need to fill all those roles, and I think Marcus Freeman will.
Yeah, and that sort of relates
and then we'll say it's a home run.
That relates to this question from Mike White. What will the support structure under Mike Martin look like?
Just looking at his background, it looks like, if he's going to be deciding about direct payments and those kind of things and who gets what money, that would seem like he would want somebody that's really good at that kind of stuff to assist him in that. He may be the guy that ultimately makes the decision, but I don't know that he's going to get into the granular details of that. And then, as Tyler mentioned earlier, the recruiting part of it, it doesn't seem like that would be a natural fit for him to be what Chad Bowden was with the squirt guns and with the, all the disguises and showing up at the airport with the boom box and stuff. That seems like somebody else would be that creative arm of recruiting. And so again, it's not just that particular position, although what Mike Martin has as strengths is pretty impressive. It's just, Mike, that's a good question, because I do think there's got to be really good people around him. That makes it more than a double hire.
Yeah, and like there will be scouting, which Matt Jansen heads up. There will be recruiting.
Does a great job.
Caleb Davis and Carter Allman have been a big part of that. In the meantime, we'll see what happens with the director of player personnel, what that person's responsibilities are. And I think maybe it shifts. Like we don't know. I think we have to hear from Marcus to understand his vision fully, and hear from whoever gets hired too. Hopefully we get a chance to talk to them, because this is changing. But there is a lot of things that go into that would fall under the umbrella of general manager, and how many of those things will Notre Dame have fall under that umbrella? I don't know that we have all the answers to that, but looking forward to learning how Notre Dame is parceling that out, and what sort are there additional hires that need to be made, like you mentioned, like someone that's crunching a lot of numbers. I don't know if you need a Notre Dame football accountant or what, like what, how does that work? I don't necessarily know all the answers to that, but I do know the scouting department had at least one analyst fellow. Ryan Brown was his name, and is his name. I believe he's still on staff, but does the scouting department get increased? How does the recruiting department get impacted? I don't know all the answers to that, but I think we'll start to get a clear picture as more hires are made.
And I think the good news is Notre Dame is willing to invest in that part of their football program, and they see the value in it.
Yeah. All right. Brian Habermill says, made it before the end of the intro. As March 18th approaches, what do you think is the most interesting spring storyline? Quarterback battle, new defense, player development, other?
Well, given the ones that you gave us, Brian, I would say quarterback battle. And I would say beyond that, it's going to be the wide receivers and the interior defensive line. I think are two position groups that I think are the ones that I have the most questions about, that I think can get some answers during spring football. So those would be the three for me, just off the top of my head.
Yeah, and I think like bigger picture, I do have questions about the new defense, but I don't think we're going to learn a lot about that in the spring. I just don't think that they're going to be very revealing as it relates to that. That's sort of been commonplace under Marcus Freeman. And so I don't know that like during the 4 weeks of practice that we'll get an answer for how that's changing and developing. But like those position battles you mentioned, the quarterbacks, the interior defensive linemen, who's practicing where on the offensive line, those are all things that I think are probably the bigger storylines from my perspective. And then like this stuff that we're talking about, like off the field, how is the general manager position developing? What are they in charge of? How is all this staffing behind the scenes doing? How is recruiting continuing to evolve? I think those are, maybe just because I cover recruiting so much, maybe that's why I'm interested in it. But I think that's always interesting no matter what time of year.
And an offshoot of that, keep in mind this timeline. April 7th is a big date in terms of the changing structure of college football. There's going to be a hearing that day with the House settlement with regard to direct payments. That could be the day where we start changing college sports a lot on that day. It's not the end date, but it's the date where things could change. So let's say the judge says, you know what, I'm approving this. I know that there's going to be a lot of lawsuits filed. Let's just go ahead. Let's start direct payments. And we're going to change the roster sizes. She's not going to say that, Claudia Wilkins, but the NCAA will say, yeah, we're going to change the scholarship limit from 85 to 105, or we're going to keep it at 85 because there's just too many lawsuits. You have a transfer portal opening up 9 days after that. So you're either going to be adding people or you're going to be, see ya, because Notre Dame's at 95 right now. So there's a lot of that stuff, which, when they say you'll never use math, you end up using it when you're my age. So unfortunately, it gives me headaches still.
All right. Bob Oxnard says, I would like to get your prediction on the most likely guys to emerge as the top 6 linebackers by the end of spring, regardless of position. And I saw this question, so I already pulled up the scholarship chart, so I'm probably ahead of you in that.
Do you want to go first, and then I'll copy off of your paper?
Yeah, so I'll lead off. I think
you.
The top 4 are easy, right? It's Drake Bowen, Jalen Sneed, Jaden Osbury, and Kingston Viliamuasa. Right. Then 5 and 6, I would probably go Madden Faramo and Preston Zinter. Those would be the 2 that I would point toward. I feel better about Faramo, even though he's a brand new freshman. I just think he's a very impressive player. I think it's going to be hard to keep him out of that top 6. And then after that, the 6th one, it could go anyway. Like the Zinter, Kahanu Kia. Does Anthony Saka come in as a freshman and impress right away? Bodie Gohoon and Teddy Rizak. Now I'm just naming all of them, but I think any of them could be.
Yeah, name every single one, then you'll be right.
Realistic options. Kia, I left one out, so let me get that one in there. But I think there's a clear 4, a likely 5th, and then 6th is up for grabs, in my opinion.
I would go with the same first 5 that you did. Anthony Saka is really interesting. I know Tom Lemming, who's a longtime recruiting analyst, really likes his size, really likes what he does. He was a top 100 fringe kind of guy. And so, I mean, he could come in and surprise. The other guy, I think, well, I like both of the Kias. I just don't know, with Kahanu missing an additional year after having the 2-year Mormon mission and then just having a few weeks of practice. And he looked great in the blue gold game last year. And then getting that torn ACL, how ready he'll be to go. I don't know which of the Kias is ultimately the better of the 2, but I know Kahanu is like my age almost. he's been around. No, I mean, he's in the prime as far as, he'll be one of the oldest sophomores in the country eligibility wise. And I think he's got a lot of good football with him. So I'm casting my vote for Kahana Kia as the number 6.
Yeah. And in revisiting the question, I realize now that it says by the end of spring, so that would eliminate Anthony Saka because he is not an early enrollee.
Okay, and neither Kia is going to probably be in spring. Ko doesn't come until June,
right?
And Kahanu may not be back from his ACL until summer.
Yeah, so maybe that makes a stronger case for Zinter to be that guy.
I think Bodie Cahoon is interesting. I mean, he had an injury at some point. He was a super productive player at a small school in Virginia, a guy that played some lacrosse in high school at a really high level. They loved him on special teams, so I wouldn't count him out.
Yeah, I think I've seen people wondering, and I think it's a fair question that, hey, maybe Preston Zinter, if he's not making an impact at linebacker, should they try him at tight end because he has played tight end at the high school level?
But do you think a 6'2" guy, other than the Davis Sherwood role, is a guy that could?
Well, I think you're looking for a depth player, right? I mean, you're not trying to replace Eli Raridan with Preston Zinter. So I think it could be. I mean, I guess the point would be, where else do you have 6'6" guys on your roster that you could move to tight end? Like, there's not a lot of those guys. Yeah, would that increase his odds of playing tight end versus playing linebacker? I don't know necessarily, but maybe it would give him more.
He did play in high school, but I just wondered as a college. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would, if he's going to move positions, could he play Viper? Like, I would be maybe even more interested in that than, even though that the depth chart is more loaded there once Boubacar Traore and Jordan Botelho get healthy. Is there
Logan
another
Thomas
way?
muscles up?
Yeah, so I think that's an interesting thought and something to monitor. Speaking of what we're talking about, Chris W says, could you do a projected depth chart? I don't know if you want us to do one right now without having prepared it. I think it'd probably be a little bit of a drag during the show, but if enough people want us to try to do this right now, we could, but it is something we haven't done yet. We usually have a projected depth chart.
I'll tell you what, why don't we try to do it for next week's show, and then we'll figure out how to do a visual so they can visualize it. So you could stop the tape,
Sure.
If you're watching the replay, you can stop it and then you can look at it longer. I think it's much easier to visualize it than for us to sit there and talk about it and then take notes, because nobody's taking notes. They're drinking a beer. Yeah.
And maybe we can update one on the website between now and then to help for that. But that is something that, if people are unfamiliar with our Inside ND Sports website, if you go to the homepage and go into the football tab, we have depth chart listed, and it goes beyond like the two deep that Notre Dame will provide. We include everyone that we think would have a chance of playing eventually. On that depth chart, we have not done one for 2025 yet, but you can see like what we did going into
I might try to make some time for that this week, and so that we'll have it ready next week, and then you can tell me how brilliant I am.
Wow, you used the wrong adjective there, but
the wrong B word. We're gonna have another Micah Shrewsbury moment.
All right, Mike DeVoy says, who are your picks for offensive and defensive sleepers in spring camp? Guys that we really didn't expect to push their way into consideration for the two deeps.
Do you want to go first while I mull, or do you want me to just come off?
I have not mulled this at all.
Okay,
So we're
let me come up with some. I'll do right off the top of my head, because Murray always makes me do this in live chat. I'm going to go with Kedron Young at running back. Even though there's 8,000 running backs, I do think he's got a unique body type. I mean, anybody at tight end, they need healthy bodies there. But I'm going to say Kedron Young on offense, and on defense, somebody that's a sleeper that we wouldn't naturally think of. Is Luke Talich enough of a sleeper? Is that? I'll go with Tay Johnson.
Okay.
Yeah, Tay Johnson will be my sleeper on defense.
Yeah, it's sleepers are tough because we talk about Notre Dame football all year round. I mean, we have a football show called Football Never Sleeps that we do once a week, so we cover everyone. And so it's like, well, we've talked about that person. Is it really a sleeper or surprising?
Yeah, but he used 3 exclamation points. So you need to work on this question.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, defensively, I think it's going to be hard on defense, because I think there's pretty good depth that's already even established on the defense.
Maybe somebody in their interior defensive line.
Yeah, so I was going to go with Sean Sevillano. That's someone that a redshirting freshman that I thought maybe could push this spring. I mean, maybe it's Armel.
Was he in your story today?
Yeah, he was in my story today. Okay. Armel Mukum is someone that he just doesn't feel like he would be a sleeper, but even though he didn't play as much last year, but he was sort of like this season's Jason Onye, where it was like someone that was talked about a lot but didn't end up playing a lot. And Onye was that, not this past season, but the year before that. And so maybe Sevillano jumps past him and surprises in the depth chart on the defense.
Well, he's got a different body type than everybody else.
Right.
That's what's in his favor. And he's pretty athletic.
Yeah. And then offensively, maybe KK Smith. I don't know if that's cheat. Like, it depends on how you're lining up the receivers where, because I think if you don't put Faison and Greathouse both at the field receiver, then KK Smith's probably automatically your number 2 field receiver for the spring. And obviously you're not going to be having Jordan Faison doing much in the spring. So he's going to get a lot of opportunities.
Not much in football.
Yeah. I should clarify, not on a football field. He'll be doing plenty in lacrosse. And so maybe Smith, and maybe that's too obvious, but that would be someone that I would think of that hasn't really had a lot of impact on the field so far for Notre Dame that could really solidify themselves this coming spring. All right, let me see if I missed any questions while we were talking. Marklith Glasses says, first time catching the show. Tyler, I still can't believe you don't like that big ND on the basketball court. I don't know if you saw this today, Eric, but I saw
Twitter. Your tweet.
What do you think of do you think of the design? I know that's not your lane that you like to go down. I don't know if that falls into uniforms, but do you like how it looks?
I didn't even notice it until you criticized it. And then and I'm thinking, okay, that was maybe the sequence of that game. Maddie Westfeld doing a block that's so emphatic, grabbing the ball, throwing it to, I think, Hannah at midcourt. Hannah gets it to Sonia Citron. It was the defining sequence, and you're like, look at the middle of the court. It sucks.
Well, no, I mean, I saw the play live. I didn't need to see it. Like, I wasn't watching that on Twitter for the first time, so I wasn't really watching the play, but it struck me. It just really, like, and I remember when they first changed it, like, I don't like this. I don't know why the ND has to be so massive. Like, it just seems comically too large. It's like there's not details that you need to see within the ND to be that large. And I thought of a joke that someone tweeted at me, like, well, us old timers, that's all we know when Notre Dame. And I was like, well, maybe they're making it that big so the old timers can see the logo. But I don't know. It just seems like if it's going to be that big, I'd like it to be more intricate than just a massive ND. And then Purcell Pavilion is like yelling at you because it's written so large. I don't know. I think it's I don't know. There are worse. I understand. People have tweeted me like, hey, there's a lot worse in college basketball. And I would agree. I'm not saying that this is even in the top or bottom 20. I just think Notre Dame could do much better than what it's done with its.
I noticed different things, like they had the free nachos promotion back last night, and I did mention that because Notre Dame didn't get anywhere close to that. It's 88 points, and it was a defensive battle last night.
Well, they don't. Do you know what the men's basketball promotion for free nachos is?
That the coach is happy? I don't know.
Well, no, but the opposing team misses 2 free throws consecutively. So, which is not easy, but it did happen. I think it was against Virginia Tech. One of the recent, I've only been to 2 games to cover this season so far because of the length of the football season. But I think it happened against Virginia Tech. A Virginia Tech player missed both of their free throws, and so fans got free nachos.
Okay, well, you're looking for more questions. I'm going to tell people about some possible good news. So when we left the Tribune, it was January of 2022, and it was pretty COVID-y. We couldn't go into the office. And I have a couple of boxes of things that I just left there. I said, you know what? And then we got so busy that I never made it back. Allegedly, those boxes exist. And I'm going into the office tomorrow to see if they are there. And if they are there, there are additional Dump Davy stickers in one of those boxes. So we'll see.
And maybe more fabulous prizes.
More fabulous prizes. We'll have to see. But I know that there were more than I had one Dump Davy sticker here that Rajon has now. And then whatever might be in that box. There might be 2 or 3 of them.
I know. I try to keep my stuff clean and get rid of it. Like I mentioned when I moved, that sort of necessitated it. As you can see behind, well, I don't know if you can tell behind me what all those things are, but those are all press passes. So I do keep those. And I have all.
I thought it was like a 4th grade art project. That's cool. Okay.
I usually keep all the lanyards, and I was like, well, who needs lanyards? And my girlfriend is an elementary school teacher, and last year I gave her a bunch of them, and the kids loved them. They thought they were the coolest thing. So now I got to save up enough to have enough for a full class. I was like, I got all my ones from the playoff.
I'll give you mine. I'm sure I have some. My grandkids like them, but I only have 6 right now. I'll have 2 more by the summer. So I'll have 8 then.
Yeah,
the twins are coming.
You
Thing
almost
1
be
and
able
thing
to,
2.
you almost be able to feel the full football team with Hansen grandchildren.
Well, I'll tell you that there will only be 2 granddaughters out of that whole bunch, and the 6-year-old watched the thing that Marcus took his family to. They streamed that Royal Rumble or whatever it was, the WWE, and I have video of her beating up a pillow, so she could be on the football team apparently.
All right. I don't see any more questions that we haven't answered.
Okay.
If you have questions, throw them in. We have some other things we can discuss. We've talked a little bit about looking ahead at spring, but I had a couple more topics. I wrote today a list of 7 freshmen, sophomores to be, who redshirted as freshmen last season, who I think could have important springs that could sort of launch them into meaningful roles this coming season. Who do you think should be at that list? What did you think of that list? Who are guys that you think?
I didn't look at your list so
Okay.
that I would not duplicate. If I did duplicate it, that I would do it unintentionally.
It's an original thought. Okay, cool. So who's on your list?
Not in order, but it was heavy offense
Yeah.
and very little defense. So I went with CJ Carr, Kedron Young.
Yep.
All 3 wide receivers. I think this is a huge spring for those guys, and that's Logan Saldate, Micah Gilbert, and especially Cam Williams. I put Jack Larson on there just because tight ends, that's kind of a wide open with the Cooper Flanagan situation. Gary Lambert, and then on defense, I went with Sean Sevillano Jr. and Tay Johnson. Tay Johnson being my sleeper, and Kedron Young being my sleeper. So I worked 2 things in. So how did we match up?
Your list was longer. I did 7. So I think you had did you have like 10? Is that
I had 9, I think.
9. So I think you had a couple more offensive guys. Yeah. We had the same defensive players. I had Tay Johnson and Sean Sevillano on my list. And the rest of mine were offense. Carr, Micah Gilbert, Kedron Young, and Cam Williams being the 4 offensive players on my list. I mean, there's just more opportunity on offense than defense.
So you had 6 or 7? You had Carr?
I had 7.
Okay.
Carr, I didn't mention Lambert. You said Lambert,
okay.
Right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. I just didn't. I bolded them on my list here, and then I, for whatever reason, didn't bold Lambert when you said him. So,
okay.
And then another query I had for you: which of Notre Dame's incoming transfers are you most interested in seeing this spring? Now, not everyone is here. Malachi Fields and the wide receiver, and Ty Washington, the tight end, will not be with Notre Dame for the spring, but the rest of the incoming transfer class will be. Who are you most interested in seeing this spring?
So that leaves us 6, and I didn't put Devontae Smith on there because I just figure he's plug and play. So I'm not as interested in seeing that. What I'm interested in seeing is guys competing for positions. So the 3 for me that I think are the most compelling are Jalen Stroman, who's from Virginia Tech, will be competing to be a starting safety, and then the 2 interior defensive line positions, just because that's such a critical position group that needs to show some progress. So that would be Jared Dawson from Louisville. He's a grad transfer. Elijah Hughes, who's kind of a rare underclass transfer. He'll be a junior from USC. How about you? Who'd you come up with?
I included Smith. I just think he and Malachi Fields, I think, are the 2 top incoming transfers.
Yeah, I agree. But I expect them to be wonderful.
Yeah, I want to see the wonderful before my eyes first. So I included Devontae Smith on the list. Jared Dawson, of course, as a defensive tackle. Stroman, I think, is another one you mentioned. And I want to see Will Pauling, the receiver from Wisconsin. Like, how much of an upgrade is he? What does he do in terms of where Notre Dame decides to play its other receivers? Like, how does he impact that? Where does he fit in? He seems, he's played mostly slot. Does that change things for how Notre Dame sees Jaden Greyhouse and Jordan Faison, or even Logan Saldate moving forward. Like, does that change things at all in terms of where they have other guys lining up? And just like how he had an issue with drops this past season, and I'll be interested to see if that seems to be recurring in spring practices, or that is an issue that's behind him and it is maybe best corrected when he's working with Mike Brown, which he did previously at Wisconsin. So maybe there, the relationship will help him get back on track. All right, the last one I wanted to get into was position battles are the most intriguing. I think we've talked a little bit about those already. Which position battles are you most interested in tracking this spring?
I would go with the quarterback, wide receivers, and interior defensive linemen. I mean, there's some other ones. I mean, yeah, who's going to be added to the linebacker depth and who's going to be, I think, the safeties are going to be interesting. Who plays opposite Adon Schuler, because there's so many good young safeties, and how deep is that rotation? I mean, Xavier Watts led Notre Dame's defensive players. I mean, he played almost 1,000 snaps, which is a ton.
Yeah.
I realize that's over 16 games, but he played a high percentage every game. I don't know that you'll have somebody, maybe Adon Schuler gets up there, but I do think that safety group is going to be deeper. Really, technically, it was 3 deep last year. I think you may go 4 or 5 deep with the safeties, there's just a lot of interesting options there with Urlacher and Blair and Talich and Stroman. I mean, that's Tay Johnson. It'll be really interesting to see if the new defense can utilize those, if Coach Ash can utilize all those safeties and different roles.
Yeah, the safety is one that is on my list for sure. Like, Will Linebacker, like, what does that look like? I'm not sure that we'll get a definitive answer about how does that rotation look moving forward alongside Drake Bowen. And then the offensive line positions, we maybe don't have answers by the end of the spring, but I'd like to see who's working where and what Notre Dame is trying to put in place in terms of what those guys are going to be asked to do going into next season. Obviously the starting spots that in theory could be up for grabs would be left tackle, right guard, and center. Before we get out of here, I wanted to talk a little bit about the future of the college football playoff, which has been another topic of conversation once again after Ross Dellinger of Yahoo Sports reported Sunday that momentum is building within the SEC and Big Ten to expand the playoff to 14 or 16 teams, assign multiple automatic qualifiers per league, and finalize a scheduling agreement between the two conferences. Final decisions are expected in the coming weeks, with the SEC and Big Ten athletic directors meeting on Wednesday. The Big 12 athletic directors are supposed to meet this week, and the ACC ADs and presidents met last week. And then the CFP management committee meets next week. So maybe there will be some finalization as it comes to that. A couple more details to add if folks haven't read the story, and it's probably hard to track if you haven't sat down and looked at all of it. So I apologize on it. Me reading probably doesn't help it. But the story said, according to most who have viewed the memorandum of understanding from last spring, the SEC and Big Ten hold sole discretion on the future CFP format starting in 2026. The agreement grants the league's decision-making powers over the format, but directs them to have meaningful consultation and collect input from other conferences before making their decision, which I found that interesting, that we knew that these conferences were going to be exerting their power, but I didn't know that they had already been given this power. It sounds like the growing model or proposed model is 4 automatic qualifiers each for the SEC and Big Ten, 2 each for the ACC and Big 12, 1 to the highest group of 5 champion, and 1 to 3 at-large spots, which would include 1 for Notre Dame if it finishes ranked inside the top 14. The 2 top seeds would get buys in a 14-team format, and no buys in a 16-team format. So a lot of words there, but Eric, do you think this is good for college football, what was being described there?
Uh, I think it's bad for college football because nobody can understand it. I'm just kidding. Let me just put a finer point on a couple things. They're still going to discuss changes for next year's playoff, but if they do, those have to be unanimous.
Right.
Everybody has to agree on those. Anything 2026 and beyond, the Big Ten and the SEC can kind of muscle people. For me, I don't like locking into as many automatic qualifiers. I would like to see less automatic qualifier guarantees and more flexibility. I'd like to see more on-campus home games. If you're going to go to 14 or 16, I'd rather not see the neutral site games until the semis. Again, that means some pretty cold days if you're playing a couple of games at Notre Dame or Penn State or Ohio State, but I still think it would be worth it. That's what I would like to see, because football from year to year, the same conferences don't have playoff worthy teams. There's some years, the Big 12 may have a really good year, and the ACC, maybe that'll happen at some point, that they'll have a really good year. And then they only get 2 teams, and maybe the Big 10 has a large middle class. It doesn't have elite teams some years. I don't like that lack of flexibility at all.
Yeah, I agree. And in the story, there was some data that was cited.
I know
that
the average number, but it's not every year,
right? It reflects the past, but also we're not trying to make a playoff system that reflects the past. Like, things are changing. Now more than ever, things could be changing in significant ways with with NIL. Like, in theory, these other programs that aren't in the SEC and Big Ten could still thrive. I don't think you have to, and I don't think, I don't know. It just seems too restrictive. And I was trying to think, people that maybe there's something out there like professional soccer or overseas or something, but automatic qualifiers typically are only reserved for champions, right? In professional baseball, division champs get into the playoffs, right? That's how it works in the NFL too. If you win your division, you get in. So I don't like giving someone who got second, third, or fourth in their conference, they didn't win a championship, so why should they be given an automatic bid into a playoff system? It doesn't make
think about how these mega conferences now, they don't have equal schedules. So really, how are you determining who's third and fourth in that conference?
Right.
Because the difficulty of the conference schedule can vary quite a bit from one team to the next.
Yeah. And I wonder if that would create a lot of infighting within conferences of hey, why aren't we the third and fourth? Why aren't we considered third and fourth this season? So I don't know. It's not something that I love. And then I think what's important to talk to, what's probably more important than our opinions is this good for Notre Dame? Do you think this is something that will work out for Notre Dame in the long run?
If the same assurances are granted to Notre Dame that have been talked about, and that is that we know, you and Tyler Ewer and I were there when we talked to a source about this, that if Notre Dame is 14th in the CFP rankings and there are 14 teams in the playoff, they're in. That's a lower bar. They're not, at the number 12 team, they're not an automatic in at number 12 in a 12-team playoff. So to be able to get in as the number 14 team, I think is good for Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame is protected as long as that math doesn't change.
Yeah, I think that the path to the playoff thing still is alive and well for Notre Dame. It's certainly not end of independence bad. I just think the more power that shifts to the Big Ten and SEC isn't necessarily a great thing for Notre Dame long term. And my biggest concern as this has started to shift is how does this impact Notre Dame's ability to schedule teams? If the SEC goes to 9 conference games and then guarantees one game to a Big Ten opponent, both of those conferences have 10 regular season games accounted for. Will Notre Dame play Big Ten and SEC teams moving forward much after that? I don't know. And if they do, will it be just the lesser Danes in the conference that are trying to move up in the world and not the guys at the top of the conference? I'm curious to see what sort of impact that has. Now that's probably a longer term impact, but I'm curious how that's going to impact Notre Dame in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, don't screw this up. This 12-team playoff was awesome. Don't screw it up by being power hungry and money hungry.
Yeah, that is the shame of it all, is that I think the one thing people would suggest being changed based on 1 year of it was that the guaranteed buys shouldn't go to the conference champions, and that maybe there should be some changes there. But I would like them to keep it at 12 and keep first round games on campuses, because I think especially the first round games on campuses, that was great. And I don't know why college football would want to move away from something like that.
Agreed.
All right. I think that's going to be it. I was going to mention here that Brian said your AP ballot is spot on every year, and he would give a playoff vote to you. So maybe we'll have the Eric Hansen Invitational as the college football playoff moving forward.
See, Brian's angling for the Dump Davy sticker.
Yeah, Brian's going to get a stack.
It's like when
Davey
my
stickers.
granddaughter said she thought I was my son's brother. She was wanting more Christmas presents.
So that'll be it for us tonight. We appreciate everyone tuning in. Make sure you hit the subscribe button here, hit the like button as well. If you have not commented during the show, leave us a comment, leave us a topic you'd maybe like us to discuss, next week. We'll probably try to do some depth chart stuff like Chris W suggested. We always are interested in what things you guys want to have discussions about. So we hope you all have a good week. If you're not subscribed to us over at InsideNDSports.com, promo code NDYT will get you a 30-day free trial. And there's a link in the video description below. We'll probably be back on Monday night next week, Eric. Is that right? You think so?
Correct.
All
yes,
right.
I do think so.
No basketball conflicts or reporting conflicts. So we will see you guys next Monday night for Football Never Sleeps, and have a great week.